I am joined by Adam Slutsky, fresh off his victory at the Square-based online tournament number 2, and you might recognize him because we had him on the channel very recently after winning the Square-based online Toronto as well. How are you doing today, Adam?
Doing great, thank you.
Fantastic, fantastic. Well, one of the things that I want to talk about is what is the difference between winning an in-person tournament and an online tournament? Because you have now done both. And in terms of big tournaments, and I'm talking ones of above 100 players, of which there have been two, SBOT 1 and SBOT 2, I think you're the only one. So what's the sort of first thing that comes to mind when you think about the differences?
I would say the biggest thing is maybe equating it more so to like the world of chess.
Mhm.
Um, they tend to have various like structured formats, and for example, the, the world championship they're doing right now, right? There's these pauses in between each round. I think they play 2 or 3 games at a time. I'm not like extremely well versed on that
Sure.
side of it. But the point in what I'm prefacing here is that in Warhammer, it's kind of similar from the standpoint that the in person is almost like a different format altogether. You're playing 5, 6 games consecutively, one after another. It's more of a mental toll overall
Mm.
to the individual, to the player. So you're more so fighting against fatigue, if anything, and just trying to quickly implement your game plan against whatever army you end up getting paired against in a semi-quick manner, right? When it comes to this online realm, it's very different. You've got a week typically, more or less, to kind of look things over, prepare. You might even be doing some sparring in preparation for the matches that you end up playing in the tournament. So that's where I kind of think it's similar to chess, where they're looking at different openings, they're practicing with their other grandmasters and things of that nature, and then they kind of come together and they will play a round or a bout of games. They'll take a break and then come back together. And so it's been similar in that manner, I think, for the online version of the tournament scene versus in person.
Interesting. I did notice that the last couple of games that you played, at least the last 2 rounds, I'm not sure about the round 4, you played quite late in the week. Was that a deliberate choice to give you time to prep for the games? Was that a choice you made?
Yes. Yeah, yeah, it was.
That's a good answer.
Yeah, I'm not gonna lie. I won't sugarcoat it.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was. It also was to the players that I was lining up against, their schedules as we got out of the group stage and the time zones started to skew and get further away. Uh, it ended up being that the weekends were just more accessible for
Mm,
everyone involved. So I
that
think
makes
that,
sense.
yeah, that also played a role into it. But I won't lie, it was helpful that we then also had extra time to prep for our games. And when I say we, I have a couple sparring partners, right, that I was working with. Shout out to Corey, who came in third place, Corebag. He's very regularly one of the individuals that I play, you know, various matchups against and with, and test out different things. So
Yeah, perfect. It is definitely a different set of skills, and this is something I've experienced from my online play. So glad to hear that you feel the same, and I get validation on my opinions, given that you've just won it. Do you think that you're more suited to winning online events or in-person events?
that's a great
Which appeals
question.
to you more?
That's a good question. I love the feel and the atmosphere of the in person.
Mm,
I don't know if you can like beat that or really replicate it. It's just not going to be the same as playing, in my case, down here in my basement office for all of the online stuff. I think from a technical skill perspective, it's probably I'm at my most skilled maybe, or just at my sharpest
mhm.
when you have more preparation time and you end up being able to do the sparring and really think out the strategy of what you're doing, and looking at the army that you're going to be going up against. You have, multiple days to look at the scenario. the deployments. You just don't have those afforded luxuries when you're playing in person. You've probably done like a comb over in person, looking at the tournament pack. You kind of have maybe a feel. You've looked over a majority of the lists once or twice, just as you were scrolling through, or whenever, if they even released it for you as the individual. Some don't. Some just let it rip and say, okay, like lists are open the day of, an hour or 30 minutes before the tournament starts. So it's very different in those regards. To kind of circle back and answer your question, I guess I prefer the in person.
Mm.
It appeals and feeds more into the nostalgia and the look of the hobby for me, which is awesome and fun. But from a technical skill perspective, yeah, I would say the latter, the online.
Yeah, that makes sense because I'm very much the opposite. I don't mind playing online, but I just never bother prepping for any of my games. So then I play if I was to play against someone like you in like a semis or a quarters who's actually taking the time to come up with a game plan, I've got much worse odds. I normally just rock up at a table, and my strength is just play like, oh, I know roughly what this does. I'm just gonna make it up as I go along, and oh hey, it's worked out. So not so good when people have a whole week to prep for you.
I don't blame you though, to be honest, because I think you're just outside of Nottingham, correct?
Mm,
Is that accurate? Yeah.
yeah,
Your community is phenomenal, right? You have it within walking distance. You've always got an RTT or GTs going pretty much every week. It seems like
it's pretty regular. Yeah.
yeah. I mean, I would, if I were in your shoes, I probably would be similar. It's a little more tricky. We don't have quite as big of a community within my immediate local scene.
Mm,
I'm very fortunate to be positioned fairly close to Toronto, which
yeah.
has a really strong scene. But it's tough logistically to just carve out the time with life and everything else to always be going to their tournaments.
Yeah.
So with that in mind, it ends up having a greater point of emphasis for me on the online side of it. And then therefore prepping for that and really like taking the time to I don't know, pour into it.
Perfect. I guess at this point, it's probably worth talking about the army that you played. You brought Warriors of Chaos, and am I right in thinking it's exactly the same list that you took to the Square Base Toronto, where we you won, and then we did an interview straight after that?
Yeah, yeah,
Perfect.
it's the same thing. So
Perfect. So if
uh,
you want an in-depth breakdown, you can go and watch that video. I'll link it down below. But do you want to give us a quick run through of what the list is, any sort of interesting decisions that you made?
sure, yeah. The list remained identical. The I would say the strategies definitely changed due to just the differences in the meta
Mm,
overall in the 2 months that this kind of took place. And just, I would say people sort of maybe had more of an end of summer to September mindset when they were making their lists and practicing for the in-person Toronto tournament. Probably more of a like fall royal host, different things like that, more poison blocks, bigger poison blocks that took place for this tournament. So there was more so just approach piloting changes that needed to kind of be thought through and tested
mm.
for those different matchups on my end of the fence when it
Did
came
you
to it.
know about the Royal Host list before you submitted your list? Were you aware of that going in?
Yeah, one of our um, gentlemen in the like I would call it localish gaming group, or just the people I usually end up playing with, whether that's online or sometimes in person even. They they had a royal host brewing. I was like aware that there was some brewing going on. I didn't know exactly what the list was going to be,
Sure.
but when the lists were all finally submitted and I saw the list itself, I was like, okay, like here we go. We've got to really brainstorm some ideas here to combat this, because I had a feeling at minimum one, if not more, of the three that were posted were going to make it quite far into the tournament.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Obviously, only one made it out of groups. That was a little bit due to the way that the groups were set up. So one went 3-0 in the group stages, but was the lowest scoring. with that sort of points denial list, you can fall foul to that. I say this from experience as the other 3-0 list that didn't make it through, because I was also playing points denial, just the much more fun and friendly Pillar of Fire Wood Elf list.
Oh yeah, so much more fun and friendly. Yeah.
Fun for all the family.
Mhm.
But yeah, what I think is interesting is we came into the top cut, and over half of the lists in the top cut were undead. They were Wood Elves, Vampire Counts, Tomb Kings, and Warriors of Chaos, and I think that's it for the top 16 lists. So coming into it, you knew that you were going to have to grind your way through some Tomb Kings, and you did. Was it 2 sets of Tomb King players that you had to beat in the top cut there?
Oh yeah, yeah. 2 sets. Also, shout out Orcs and Goblins. You guys also made it in. You had two lists, so I
Ah,
just wanted to give them their comeuppance or what have you. But yeah, the 2 lists very diverse as well, right? One is run by Kazandu Phil, who's an extremely strong player in North America.
mm,
He regularly is winning GTs, so he also somewhat similarly to me really stays within the same wheelhouse, runs a very tight list that is pretty much always the same, and it's truly just about his piloting.
mm,
Um, and there's inherent flaws to the list, and there's inherent strengths to the list, but because of him as a pilot, like he's so well versed in the game that he just knows like what he needs to focus on, where he needs to be positioning, things of that nature, which make him a very strong opponent. Excuse me, strong opponent overall. So that was a very tough match, and it was
yeah,
unfortunate to a degree. We were both out of that NA1 kind of quasi group of death, and I know EU1 had a similar fate, if
yes,
you will, for you as well. But
yeah,
when we made the top 16 cut, I kind of breathed a somewhat of a sigh of relief in that I'm like, okay, I made it through this, you know, like just debauchery of a group of lots of Bretonians, lots of very strong meta players. And then, you know, Shane ended up telling us that for the first round of that Sweet 16, it's like you're still going to be playing against your pods. You're just going to be, you know, you're going to now break into like that one ultimate winner of that pod. And I'm like, oh great, okay. So Phil and I end up playing each other.
managed to dodge it all the way up until you didn't dodge it,
Yeah.
hitting the round 4. So I wanted to talk a little bit about your run through, because I think you had a pretty impressive run, actually, even if you just look at the armies, and then obviously there's the names as well involved. So round 1 you went into Mortuary Cult.
Mhm.
Um, I think we can probably breeze past that a little bit, just on the basis of you've played multiple Tomb King players, so we don't have to go too super into detail. Round 2, you played into Shane, or Ors, who was
Yeah.
playing Exiles Bretonians, I believe, which is probably, would you say it's the worst matchup for your list? Is that the
One,
hardest one for you to play?
100%. Yeah.
How did that
Absolutely.
how did that game go for you?
Skin of my teeth. um, his cannons were ineffective, and that was
Mm,
probably the difference, maybe
sure.
more or less. So I also, after some concerted effort in shooting at his Pegasus block with my magic, eventually got some spikes and was able to grind it down to the point where it was ineffective if it chose to go into one of my targets, whether that's the Dragon Ogres or Forsaken.
Sure, sure. That is one of the weaknesses of the Exiles Bretonian list: lack of magic resistance, or magic defense, I should say.
Mhm.
Definitely a strong way to play against it. So you scraped through an 11-9, and we didn't actually see any Bretonians in the top cut, which is maybe part of the reason that we ended up with a Warriors of Chaos versus Warriors of Chaos final. But then into round 3, you came up into High Elves, and was this a particularly difficult game for you? It was quite a strong win, I remember.
Yeah, good player. Daps. He's also in that similar meta state of like Phil and Luna.
Mm,
So he's in that same region. I'm off the top of my head forgetting exactly, but I think he's just outside of like the Baltimore area. So in the States, that is. Um, he had a strong high elf list. It had some downsides for the specific list that I was running, as opposed to maybe some of the others. And I think he ended up telling me like he was a bit under the weather when we ended up playing our game because we were trying to get it in before he went off on like a business trip or something of that nature.
Mm.
So he, it just ended up snowballing a little more than probably it would have normally, as all that ended up happening for that game. But it was a strong list. He ran Sisters of Avalorn, and there was a dragon with a mage and Spectral Doppelganger, etc.
Yeah,
So,
Noblon Griffin BSB, a couple of Frostheart Phoenixes, and a Lothan Skycutter.
mhm.
So a fairly tanky high elf list as it goes, but didn't have too much difficulty carving through. I guess with that Ogre Blade character, you can kill
Yeah,
most things that come up against you without triple save. That's for sure.
absolutely.
Perfect. And that brought you into the top cut, and we have just touched on Kazandu's list. Kazandu obviously playing a Grand Army Tomb
Mhm.
Kings list. So I think, I could be wrong, you might be the only player to have played all three variations of Tomb Kings. I'd have to double check that, and I'm not going to because it'd be a lot of legwork. But I'm confident saying you're the only player who beat all three variations of Tomb Kings. And if Pash has done it as well, I'm sorry, Pash, because I just apparently all of my videos are indirectly throwing straight at him without intending to. But yeah, so you beat all three variations of. His is the list with the double Necro Serpent, the double Tomb Scorpions, double
Mhm.
Bone Dragon. So it's a fairly, if you look at it on paper, you go, oh, I understand what this does. But you say that obviously he's a phenomenally skilled player and he does win a lot of events out there for you. So you've come through, you've beat two Tomb King players, you've beat a High Elf player, and you've also beat a Bretonian player. Don't know how I forgot that one. Coming into round 5, you had what I would say is actually a Wood Elf favoured matchup. And it probably depends how you play it. But you were playing into Morkel's Wood Elves, and it is, I think, a pretty good list, apart from the fact that it's got 2 units of Wild Riders that are going to be hard to control into something that really wants to be in combat. Was that sort of the thing that made it an easier game for you, do you think?
Yeah, I would say so. There was it's really, yeah, it boils down to trying to exploit the Wild Rider's unruliness. Um, and even if that means he screens for them, if you park something and then you are able to shoot that unit screening for them, and then it opens it up so he has to charge, right? Things like that. So he also had a bit of just a snafu on exactly how like countercharging works. So I was able to capitalize a little bit on that in the matchup, and then it kind of snowballed from there, if I remember correctly. We had an epic dragon off where it was like my full strength dragon versus his. Granted, I had a couple of buffs on, which is the only reason why I really like considered taking that that matchup on, but they killed each other like simultaneously at the same time, just in the second round of combat against one another, just both swinging their ogre blades and just carving each other apart. So that was pretty cool.
That's impressive. Oh
Yeah.
yes, of course, because you've got the enchanting aura to give strikes last, but given that it's an elf, it
Mhm.
does have that strikes first counters out. You both just sit at the same initiative and then just carve through each other.
Yep.
That's fun because I think it's fair to say that despite the wood elf, the chaos dragon being maybe the best and most effective dragon overall, the wood elf dragon is the best dragon specifically for combat. If you're not
Mhm.
going to get shot, it is the one that you really are going to struggle to deal with those malices to hit, making it very difficult to get around.
Exactly. Yeah.
Perfect. Okay, so you carved through the wood elves, then you came into the match that I think you'd probably been looking forwards to the most, we'll say, and this
Yeah.
was when you played in round 6. This would be no round 5. Sorry,
Yes.
when you played into Denarius's royal host list.
Yeah. Yeah. He had a pretty strong, obviously, royal host list, did
Hmm.
very well with it. To your point, it's a points denial list. It takes some um what's the right word for this? It takes a certain level of finesse to pilot it and get the most out of it. I had seen Flacco as an example. He was the other one, and the one more locally, like in my group, that had been running a variation of that
Yeah,
same royal host list. He he had it even bigger, where it was like 180 archers, and there was basically nothing, no
yeah,
scorpions, no nothing outside of a chariot, and I think that just that one little unit of skirmishers, which is less than 100 points total. So you had to go into that unit, and you had to either grind out all 180 skeletons or get the characters, which was really difficult. But jumping back to Daenerys's version, and the reason why I brought up his is because I looked at it and I said, okay, like there's avenues to get the three scorpions, and he had the couple units of skirmishers and the one chariot. So I knew right off the bat there was a few hundred points to be able to play with. And then due to the format of the tournament, it's 1 point, right? All you need is one singular victory point of over your opponent to get the victory in itself. So I had a little bit of that going into it, but ultimately the strategy was to get into combat as effectively as possible. Make sure you are not giving any stand and shoots. No matter what, just cannot let the royal host stand and shoot. And that if you do, then you're going to lose combat most likely because of just the volley fire and everything going in and all that static combat res plus what they get from the stand and shoots. So with that in mind, it was really a case of just pushing everything into his face as quickly as possible and forcing some difficult decisions. And I think ultimately it ended up working out just from the standpoint of at one point I was like an inch away or maybe an inch and a half away with my my chosen knights, and he ended up charging them, right, because he wanted to kind of like break them off, but due to stubborn, they were able to just end up backing off and reforming. But then that allowed kind of everything else to get into combat without getting the stand and shoots. So that was how I was able to, I guess, take it out.
Yeah, and if I remember correctly, because I was jumping in and out and watching that game, I was also playing my game at roughly the same time, so it was hard to keep an eye. But I believe it was very close right up until it wasn't, basically, and then in sort of the last turn, you just managed to completely finish off the unit and get a really solid 20-0 victory.
Yeah, pretty much. It was a case of, can he get some of my other units not named the dragon out of the picture? But because of the character placement that he had for the king itself, and then the two accompanying royal heralds that right absorb the hits and things of that nature, his king was not in direct base-to-base contact with the dragon ogres that ended up eventually charging in.
Mm-hmm.
And I think had it been in base contact, it would have been a much like closer grind to the finish as to if I could end up getting over the hump. But due to that placement positioning, I was able to more smoothly dispatch the overall block itself and then eventually snowball. So
yeah, that does make sense. Any character holding an ogre blade weirdly is pretty solid into anything that has ogre in the name.
yeah.
Even if it's dragon ogres, the best of all ogres. But yeah, no, so congratulations on that. That is the one that I personally thought that list might be the one to take it. In the sort of run up, I also knew about the list sort of a week or so before submission, and I looked at it. I was like, I could just like put together some sort of like anti-Death Star. I was putting together some like Cold One buses that have good play into it, but kind of suck into everything else. And I was like, whatever. I'll just put Wood Elves together. It's like, what are the chances that I end up playing against? And if I do, it'll be in like the finals or the semi, so it's not a problem. And then someone played it in my group as well, but managed to dodge it. But I was concerned. So apart from the very last round where we saw the Royal Host list lose to Tomb Kings in the Mork Cult matchup, the only other list that beat it consistently or at all has been Warriors of Chaos. Do you think that Warriors of Chaos are probably the only army that have the tools to deal with it without sort of list tailoring? Because obviously coming into this event, no one really knew that was going to be a thing.
Yeah. They're one of three armies, in my opinion, that can do it. I think the other easiest, without like a lot of list tailoring, would be dwarves, believe it or not.
No, that makes sense.
Yeah, I think they have arguably the best shot. They don't have great they don't have like any monsters, right? Anything to easily just delete for the royal host. And they can do their drilled anvil shoot up the board shenanigans, and then they can drill out really wide if they want to.
Yeah.
So, and then they have great armor, right? So they can absorb some shooting. And really, once that king gets into combat, he's a monster, and he ignores the ogre blade multi wound effect and stuff like that. And
Mm.
so they could
They
just really.
bring their own static combat res as well.
Yep. Yeah, they do as well, right? They've typically got 5 or 6 on average, if not sometimes even more. But yeah, and plus their units are significantly better than skeletal archers. So
What? No, I don't even mean weapon skill. Is it? Do they hit weapon skill 3? I should know this. I think the Royal Host hits weapon skill 3, but yeah, still dwarves hitting them on 3 is
yeah,
very comfortably.
yeah, with the banner or my will be done, they'll get up to like 4, but it doesn't even matter. Dwarves are typically the unit you'll see is like weapon skill 5, right? So
Yeah, yeah.
yeah,
All of the ones that you care about being in combat. Yeah,
yeah.
absolutely. So you've got dwarves, you've got Tomb Warriors of Chaos. What's the third one that you think can do it without tailoring?
Well, I think Wolves of the Sea can. I guess that's
Mm,
still within Warriors of Chaos. That
sure.
would be one, and then I think High Elves can as well. Um, believe it or not, because
The
they're
sister shooting? No.
no, not as much. I think it's all the monster mash that they can
Oh,
do. They can their BSB and their Lord on the dragon are so defensively kitted.
yeah.
I don't think they can really push through the. They're both on 2-up saves. They typically at least one of them has a 6-up ward, one has a 5-up ward, and then they both will have the 5-up regen.
Yeah, I
So
don't think you can get both to have a. Is the BSB on a horse, actually, are you thinking, or on a griffin?
Griffin, yeah,
Griffin. I think you can only get up to a 2-up save for one of them because the Dragon Helm isn't extremely common. But I might be missing something. But that's kind of by the by. I get your point. You've got
yeah,
2 very tanky characters, one of which is a BSB, one of which is just a kitted out Lord
hmm
who is, yeah, triple save, very hard to churn through. Yeah, no, that makes sense. When I was testing with Dark Elves, I was doing something similar with like a
so
Cold Night
yeah,
Bus, and then also a 2-up save dragon. So you don't take anything on the stand and shoot, and you just get in there as well. But yeah,
yeah.
no, fantastic. I guess maybe Beastman could do it if you just went 3 units of 4 Dragon Ogres and
I thought about them as well as a potential option. I think like probably once their journal comes out, I would wager if this is still for some reason a big part of the meta, I would think Beastmen will have a little more toolage to be able to knock it off. But yeah,
I think we're probably saved from that on the basis of it didn't win. If it won SBOT, I think we'd see some real copycats. I've got, obviously we announced the Team England Discord. We've got someone in there who's been playing Royal Host in person and is currently painting it. I think for an event this weekend at the TSN Arena. So I'm going to go down and knock all of his models over because.
and he's doing the full 100 or something plus.
I haven't kept track. He posts
Wow.
pictures every now and then. I'm like, it's a lot of skeletons, bud. Like, good luck. Enjoy painting those. Some late night Discord sessions for sure.
For
But yeah,
sure.
fantastic. So that takes us right to the final, and obviously I was there. I got to experience it firsthand, and I really enjoyed it. There were a lot less tech issues than the first one. I'm not going to blame the players for the tech issues in the first one, but it was a much more enjoyable experience for someone who had to sit there and pay attention the entire time.
Yeah.
How were you feeling about this final into King Pasha's Warriors of Chaos going into it?
Yeah, his night bus is very scary. It's obviously what the list is really catered around, and it's a vessel, if you will, for his 3 big characters if he wants. He can put all 3 in there. He can split out, which I think he correctly did in this matchup. Only had the 2 in there and then the 1 off to the side. um, with that in mind, it was really the night bus and the big spawn that I felt deemed the biggest threats. I knew that he was going to have the positional advantage to a degree based on the fact that I had, I think, 3 less drops than him in total. So I knew he would set up his spawn in a manner that would be probably apart or across, I should say, from my Forsaken, which are the juicy target on my end of the board. And so in my head, I just thought, if I can get my dragon right in his face, right off the rip, and make things difficult for him being able to like move up and like actually maneuver and do things, that would be like at least the easiest game plan to follow off the start. And then there was like contingency plan B, contingency plan C, right, in my head. But in the matchup, luckily, I got the Arcane Urgency off in turn 1. I parked an inch away. I forced him to the characters to vacate, which I figured they would. And then it was a matter of if he can get his knights out of harm's way against the dragon, because it would take an AU to get them out of that position, and dice are dice, and I was lucky enough to not have his AU go off, which presented the full unit of the knights to the dragon to just be able to take out over the course of 2 combat rounds. So
Yeah. So just to explain that to anyone who didn't see or might not have
yeah.
followed along, basically you got the first turn roll off. You had the +1.
Mhm.
You went first. You marched the dragon forwards. You cast your arcane urgency. Obviously, you have arcane puppet. Is it arcane puppet? Infernal puppet.
Infernal.
Your
Yeah.
opponent has infernal puppet as well. So when I was looking at that, I looked at it and I thought that puts a lot of the benefit in your hands, because his list really kind of needs the casters to turbocharge it, whereas yours is more like it's nice to have, but you've got a dragon which can just play on its own.
Mm-hmm.
So you cast your arcane urgency, you're casting it from a safe range, you get the spell off. The dragon then ends up 1 inch away from the big knight bus that has a single caster in, the demonology caster, and also the chaos lord with the ogre blade and all the good stuff there. At that point, Pash decided that he couldn't risk taking the charge, because you did roll that 6 for your favor of the gods turn 1, which was, I don't think actually would have made any difference to the combat, because it takes you from strength 7 to 8.
8. Mm-hmm.
And Pash didn't have he had the Nurgle +1 toughness spell, but he didn't roll demonic vigor, so he
Yes.
didn't have the +1 toughness there. So I think in retrospect it didn't actually matter, but when he was weighing it up, it was definitely something that affected his decision making. And he decided, instead of charging your dragon, he was going to yeet the Chaos Lord out of the unit towards your models, which was like the rest of your army, which I thought was a fantastic move, because it really
Mm-hmm.
put a lot of pressure on you to mop up everything in front of you and not chase after him. And then he took the other caster out as well. But then when he went to get the arcane urgency off, didn't manage it, as you say, which was absolutely huge. So that night bus just ended up, over the course of a couple of rounds of combat, getting eaten by the dragon. And then you got to, I think you killed it on his turn as well, from memory. So you get,
Mm-hmm.
or maybe there was one model left. You held, turned
Yeah.
around, like, now I get to chase off some dragon ogres and
Different
win
things.
combat. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. That was helpful. Yeah, when he catapulted his lord out of the unit straight into my lines, I think that was the right play. It was just a matter of, could he carve through quickly enough to kind of make up the deficit that the dragon was doing in his back line. And that's really where it boils down, with when you're weighing like points denial, and are my points making up what they cost to bring to the table, and et cetera, et cetera. And that was kind of where it was an advantage, and then eventually was able to kind of like go from there. I was able to run down his unit of 5 marauders with the puppet sorcerer in there, with some luckier dice as well. So that kind of that was a good capitalization that would benefit stroke of luck, what have you, as well. So
yeah, I think it's fair to reference there were some very swingy dice in that final, and I think you had some good dice. Pash had some horrendous dice, but then also had some good dice as well.
Mhm.
But the turn 1 play of putting the dragon in front of the night brick, I think, was probably the game winning move in my eyes. I looked at that, I was like, if I was on the other end of that, I would feel very uncomfortable coming back. But you referenced Pasha's Chaos Lord going out to try and hunt down and carve through as many points as possible. Well, how did that go for him with his first charge into your chosen knights?
That was crazy. That
Yeah.
was insane. I obviously challenged out, just because I'm thinking in my head, I'm like, I'm just denying as much as, for as long as possible. I'm going to try to make this 265 points a grind for him to get through. So I figured he'd slaughter my guy, win by a large amount with his ogre blade, and then I would have to stubborn back, and then he'd have some decisions to make again. Do I continue into the knights? Do I try to chase marauders? Whatever. But I think he should be an exalted champion. He should have been, right, with that
I think
kind
he
of.
is now.
He is now, yeah,
Yeah.
right. Because my Pash, I think he even used his coin, so he had like 5 hits. I think 4
Yeah.
wounds, 4
Well, he
wounds
rolled
on 2.
horrendously. He rolled all ones, twos, and threes, obviously hitting you on threes. I want to say he only got 3 hits. So
Mhm.
then he ummed and ahed because he knew that he needed the coin to realistically threaten the dragon, but then went, well, I can't take the risk here, which is great decision making. Rolled, got an extra 2 hits, so I think it was something like 5 hits. I think converted all of those hits into wounds. And how many of those wounds did you convert into past armor saves?
Yeah, yeah, we tanked it all. Rolled 4 or 5 4-ups, which is I was like, "Okay then," you know?
I
I
think actually it's worse than that if I remember correctly. I think you rolled 3 saves and then you had 2 6-up ward saves
it
and
was
you double
something.
sixed it,
Yeah,
which
it was just it was yeah, I mean, it was just like I'm like, "Okay, Jesus, like,
yeah.
what is going on?" You know? And then the other thing was, like, when we finally our dragon ogres collided into each other
Mm,
because time was ticking, he had to move them, like, my dragon was in his back line, so he eventually which was part of the game plan was, "Okay, force him forward, at least I get to, like, strike first."
mm,
In the Droger v Droger combat. That was insane. I had 12 dice. I hit with 10
10
of
of them.
them,
Yeah.
and he had 13 dice, and he hit with 11 of them, all on
Mm,
4-ups. This, mind you, so both sides just absolutely walloping each other. It was it was something crazy. A lot of damage there, but
yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, very fun game. I really enjoyed watching it, and it did come to. I think the score was relatively high scoring. I want to say it was something like a. Oh no, it was a 12-8 victory for you, and it really felt like a 12-8 grind.
Mhm.
That when you were coming into those sort of like, I think from your turn 5, it was obvious that there wasn't really much that could happen to cause you to lose it, unless somehow the dice really abandoned you to the point of a giant spawn killing a dragon in combat. Um, uh, but
Yeah.
yeah, were there any sort of like major takeaways that you had from that? Anything that maybe you'd think about changing lists, looking at different ways of playing things differently?
Yeah, I think Pasha's list to a degree inspired some of what I'm doing with my Wolves of the Sea. I'll say that
Mm,
much. That's the next army that I'm transitioning into, or I have been. I've been painting it and like testing it, and I'm going to be taking it to a couple different events. So, some of what he was doing with his his lord and its flexibility to be able to charge in different directions and being tooled out like that was really good, really strong, and I think it performed well. He obviously got really far into the tournament. He beat one of the royal host lists. He beat um, who was, in my opinion, one of the strongest mortuary cult players in Corbag or Corey. He's extremely good with mortuary cult, so he was able to. It was a knife's edge game. That one was crazy for their semifinal matchup. Talk about like back and forth and like by one static combat res point, different swings in the game, kind of going
yeah,
for theirs. But yeah, I mean, his performance was great. When it came to that.
perfect. All right, fantastic. Well, thank you so much for joining me. It's been really fun to talk through some of the differences and the online play and how you've done over the last 7 weeks. It has. It's weird how fast it's flown by. But do you have any sort of closing thoughts before we wrap up?
Yeah, I can't wait to play everyone in England when I come for Worlds or whatever that is.
Hell yeah. Looking forward to seeing you, buddy. And you'll be on my turf then. And I
Yeah.
don't mean in England, I mean in person.
Yeah.
All right. Thanks for joining me.
Yeah, thank
Thank you
you.
for watching, and thank you to the support that I receive from my channel members. Huge thanks to the Grail Knight tier supporters, and also thanks to the Longbeards and the Fnatic tier supporters as well. If you want to support the channel, you too can become a member. The link is down below the video. But if you don't want to give me any money, which is entirely fair enough, I would appreciate the thumbs up, the comments, all of those good things that help me get found in the YouTube algorithm. They really help, and they've been helping grow the channel, and I appreciate the support that I've been given. If you want to see more stuff and just engage in the community we've been building, there is a closer order Discord down below. It's not a VIP Discord, anyone can join, but there are some VIP sections for the YouTube members at Longbeard tier and above. Currently, I'm trying to get 2 videos out a week on a Thursday and a Sunday, and also doing 2 live streams. That's a Tuesday and a Friday. I do stick to this as much as possible. So, check me out. I'll see you around.